While the holidays can be a time full of joy, love, and making new memories with friends and family, it can also be a heartbreaking time, remembering those we've lost. Some set aside time to visit their loved one's final resting place, the cemetery, to leave flowers or even whisper a prayer. But in Groveland, as our Tammy Fields shows us, that was something that was almost impossible to do for 7 decades.
Among the thick, twisted vines and huge trees, back in the day it would have been hard to tell. This was a sacred space.
I can remember my dad sneaking me through the bushes to get out here to look at my Uncle Sam's grave that's down there.
For lifelong resident of Groveland, Sam Griffin, he remembers visiting the Oak Tree Union-colored cemetery of Taylorville, established around 1895 to 1900. He was just a boy then.
We called him my Uncle Doe.
Griffin, a Vietnam veteran, named after his uncle who served in World War I. He grew up hearing the stories.
Dad told me about him, that he was tough. He was tough, and back in that time, to make corporal, you had to be tough.
But paying respects to his legacy was challenging.
Because the property around the great cemetery here was owned by other people, and we couldn't cross over that.
And even if you had permission,
you'd have to look at a picture. I mean, a real close picture of just how this place looked. This place was terrible. All this was grown up and nothing but solid woods and everything.
Griffin says over the years, conditions worsened here until a call of action lit a flame in this man's heart. Groveland's Fire Chief Kevin Carroll.
I'm somebody who absolutely loves history.
In 2021, he volunteered to take on a new project to revitalize the site, calling on Nigel Rudolph, public archaeologist with 25 years of experience in the field.
And at that time, it was the worst conditioned cemetery I'd ever seen.
Headstones lost or broken.
Immediate danger of being erased from history forever.
In such a poor state, it would take hundreds of thousands of dollars to restore. Money Chief Carroll says the city of Groveland didn't have.
Right around the time he reached out to me, a new grant had come up from the Division of Historical Resources, the Abandoned Cemeteries grant, and he went for it.
Having never written a grant in his life, Chief Carroll landed it, a $499,000 grant, which would clear the way to uncover history. With a simple hand probe, Rudolph found about a dozen buried grave markers. A ground-penetrating radar survey discovered the past, some 229 possible grave sites.
The folks that are buried here built this community.
Rudolph calls them the backbone of this community, working in citrus groves in the turpentine and sawmill industries. But its most compelling find? Each one of the handmade handstones, the non-military ones, all have a symbol of a fraternal organization on them.
Well, it turns out historically in this part of Florida that the fraternal organizations were a way for African Americans to have burial insurance.
Even in death, Rudolph says there's so much you can learn here about who people were and how they lived. A history longtime journalist and church musician Linda Charlton made it her mission to discover. She set out to visit numerous local churches, trying to track down aging elders who could share firsthand memories of the cemetery and its occupants.
I proceeded to connect with every old black person I could find in the community, and of course this meant going to the churches there, the ones that had been there forever.
All in hopes of finding a relative with a connection.
I looked at the list and I said, that's my grandfather. Joe Green is my mother's father.
She also recognized the names of her paternal grandparents, sharing her memories of sadness that her mother was not able to visit the gravesite of her father, Joe Green.
So it was like when she would mention that, you know, like my daddy is in that area somewhere, was buried out there somewhere, and That's all she would tell us.
Her family, unable to pay their respects, now finally had an answer.
When they pulled up everything for me, I see that he was in the turpentine and he was doing some things out there, because that's what a lot of them were doing at that time, the meals and stuff like that.
Humbled and thankful for so many people's efforts, generous donations that poured in, and dedication.
I've learned more about him in the last 2 years than I had in my whole life.
Besides the oral history, volunteers researched and found pages and pages of these Florida death certificates that fill in the gaps. All of that information now available on this digital touchscreen here in the cemetery for anyone to access, but especially for families, relatives for which this is their final resting place. Griffin, skeptical at first about yet another effort to turn things around here, encouraged he can now visit this restored burial ground.
It was the community coming together to do good, to do what was right, and we did it.
In Groveland, Tammy Fields, Spectrum News.